Welcome to Residential Tech Talks. I'm Jeremy Glowacki, Executive Editor of Residential Tech Today. In this episode, I'm joined by Mark Feinberg, President of Home Theater Advisors, a custom integration firm specializing in middle market projects in New York City. Unlike so many companies in the home technology space who may scoff at more modest projects, Mark embraces the idea of taking on projects in the $2,000 to $30,000 range, noting in his marketing that no project is too small. I'm not saying that that's what he always wants to do, but at least he embraces it, which is cool to hear. And thanks, Mark, for joining us today. It's good to see you.
Thanks for having me, Jeremy. I really appreciate it. Great to see you.
Yeah, and like I said, I know that you would love to have the bigger projects when you can get them, but I just think that it's notable that the way you kind of entered the market, you've kind of taken on all comers essentially. And I wanted to ask you, well, first of all, one of the connections we have is Todd Puma, who on an earlier podcast I interviewed. And in that episode, I joked with Todd about in his residential systems blogs that I used to edit, he would often turn to anecdotes involving his good friend, Mark Feinberg. And for the longest time, I didn't really know much about you, but it became kind of a running joke with John Siaka, another residential systems writer, and me about how many times your name came up. So we said we're going to turn it into a drinking game, kind of like the old Hi Bob Newhart show drinking game. And so I think you got wind of that and kind of got a laugh out of it. But
absolutely. How was the game? Was it pretty good?
Yeah.
You didn't get too drunk. Probably just a little buzz. You got maybe a couple of shots at an article.
Yeah. It's not great when you're editing in the middle of the afternoon and
it's true.
You're playing the drinking game. But one of the things that I did learn early on was that you didn't necessarily, and we met at CEDIA as well after that, that you didn't come from this industry early on, like a lot of people that are in this industry. You sort of switched careers, and so when would this have happened? How old were you, I guess, as a mile marker there to understanding how long it was before you joined the industry?
Sure. I started in the industry actually working at ADI. I ran product management and marketing because they're headquartered out in Melville, New York on Long Island, and I'm in New York City. So it's like an hour commute. And I was there for about a year. I probably went to ADI. I was in my late 30s. And then when I left ADI, I'd always had a passion for this industry and I shouldn't say for this industry. I probably didn't even, like most of our clients, barely knew this industry existed. But I had a passion for consumer electronics, and I was the one who always helped my friends, buy a new TV and connect things up. In college, I'm the one who split cable 17 times, so everyone in my fraternity had free cable. So when I had the opportunity at ADI, I learned a lot more about the custom integration side of things and left there. And one of the things I had always said in my career was I wanted to be closer to the customer. I'd started out in management consulting at one of those big, mega consulting firms that worked with the Fortune 500, all jammed in a conference room, putting together pretty presentations or decks for the client to have when we left. Then I went to the apparel industry where I was doing corporate strategy and finance work, and then I moved into marketing, which was kind of always my passion. And from there, I was getting closer to the customer. That was kind of the goal all along, was understanding the customer more. And I realized there's no better way to be closer to the customer than to be in their home. So when I left ADI and had the idea to start up this business, it was melding of a few great things. I'd always wanted to do my own thing, but never had a great idea of what I could do as starting my own business. I was passionate about the product in the industry, and I got closer to the customer. So kind of checked all the boxes for me.
And when were you connected with Todd Puma? When did that happen?
It was actually very early on. I was a lone gunman out there as myself, doing everything from finance and marketing to installing to mounting TVs, kind of grabbing a friend when I needed somebody. I was almost the prototypical trunk slammer, probably. And there was an article in, I think it was Resi Systems or CE Pro, I can't remember. It was a profile of Todd and his business. And there was a sidebar about the home theater rebuild, because this was 2011, so it was rebuilding after the market crash in 2008.
Right.
And it was about how he wanted to help integrators whose businesses had failed or people who were getting off their feet do it right. And he was in the New York, New Jersey area, and I reached out to him. He took me under his wing. I went to job sites with him. Critically, he loaned me one of his lead installers. So I, being a nice Upper East Side Jewish boy, am not so handy and great at the manual labor part. My expertise is more the technology and the business side of things. So having somebody who really understood construction and understood, especially in New York City, dealing with whether it's Latin plaster or it's sheetrock or it's cinder block walls, we have a whole host of different construction issues here, who understood that, knew how to run the wire, was great. So his installer worked with me every Friday that I needed him. And that bridged the gap for me to get off the ground between hiring somebody full-time and doing it myself, because I didn't have enough work to hire somebody full-time. I would have lost money if I'd done that. But I didn't. It was how did you make that jump to being busy enough? And having him every Friday was enough to be busy enough for him to be on the job site. Anything I had to get done later in the following week, I knew how to do. He would kind of coach me through what had to happen a little bit. And then, that's really how Home Theater Advisors kind of got off the ground and was able to grow and get to the point where I could start hiring my own installers.
Very good. Yeah, that's an interesting start there. The fact that you're not a necessarily a hands-on technical guy out of the gate. It does remind me of my wife's grandmother, who lived in Fort Lee when she was alive, and every now and then I would go over there. I'm not Jewish. I'm married to a Jewish woman, and so I would go there and I would change light bulbs and do different things for her. And she was that dramatic New Yorker type personality, and she'd say, "Jeremy, the things you do for me, it's so amazing, all the things that you can do," and I turned to my wife and I said, Jewish women are so easily impressed by that sort of like simple stuff that I
Absolutely.
am having to do,
But, it's the same thing here at home. My wife can't believe what I'm capable of doing now.
Very good. I love it. Yeah. So Home Theater Rebuild, I remember Todd was mentioning something about sort of the pricing structure and not devaluing.
Exactly.
That type of thing. Can you get into a little bit more of explaining some of the methodology or theories or concepts there that you were working with?
Absolutely. I mean, it was after the recession. Lots of dealers were really just undercutting on price to get any work they could. And that was one of Todd's big mantras, was don't undercut yourself, don't discount. Because if, as I knew from corporate America, but he kind of brought it to life, was if you cut your labor rate if you cut your profit margin 50% on a job in order to win it, you've now got to work twice as hard to make the same amount of money you made last year. You've got to land twice as many jobs. Do you really think you're going to be able to do that? And that was how he got through to a lot of the people he worked with in the rebuild, was really helping them do that very simple math. And so not discounting, not devaluing yourself, not devaluing the value we add to a home was the big message.
Very good. And what you kind of evolved in terms of your input with Todd then, and the reason he ended up mentioning you so often in the column or the blog was that you were doing some different things than he was doing, so he could refer to your interest in something new that wasn't necessarily within his product line. And so where did you, as sort of a one-man band with maybe some small staff growing as a company,
right?
How did you differ as companies from each other in those early days?
Yeah, I mean, I think Todd in those early days, Todd was probably doing $20,000 to $50,000 jobs, I'm going to guess, and I was blown away. I couldn't imagine that people were spending that much money on this and that we would land those kinds of jobs. And it's always kind of that differential has always kind of remained. He was at the time, I think he was doing a lot of URC work. He was working with Total Control, and then he transitioned over to Crestron years ago, and has always just been in the world. He had celebrity clients back then who kept referring him on to other celebrities, and his business was just a different scale of project than I seemed to be landing and that I was comfortable with. Probably somewhat undersold myself at the time. A little afraid to grow too fast and make a mistake, and not. My biggest fear was disappointing a client and not doing a job well, and stretching myself too far beyond my knowledge and my skills. Todd and I became very close friends. We still are, and I always at least had that fallback of, oh my God, if I got myself in too much trouble, I knew Todd could. He'd been in the industry for 8 or 9 years by the time he and I had become friends. So I always had his expertise and knowledge to fall back on, at least. He is now, doing even larger projects. And I'm, in that, what I call the middle market for New York, which I think my marketing says 2,000 to 30,000. It's probably now more 5,000. Well, so probably 2,000. But I'm now targeting those $50,000 to $75,000 jobs as well.
Okay. So tell me about how that process of client base works in New York, because I only think of the major markets as these mega projects and these, brownstones and things. And,
Right.
Unfortunately for our industry, there's a big drop off in terms of our connection with clients after that, down to the more mainstream middle market kind of client. And
Right.
yet I mean, like you said, $30,000 for most people, it's like, that's a lot of money for AV gear.
Right.
Nothing to scoff at, but relative to, $500,000 or something crazy. What are you looking at in terms of these types of projects? What are they typically trying to accomplish in these homes in New York, these condos or co-ops that you might work on?
Right. And I think that's the big difference is the size. So going from a brownstone, which people who aren't from New York is, a standalone, usually 4 or 5 story building that's a single home structure in the city that abuts another building right next to it. But that could be 4,000 or 5,000 square feet, which in the city is enormous. I do mostly condos and co-ops, which are owned apartments, and there you're looking at everything from 800 square feet to, you do get to 4,000 square feet sometimes. But once you're in an apartment, some of the subsystems go away. So that's also what affects the scope and scale. Not doing any security cameras because you don't need it. Not doing any alarm systems because you're in a doorman building. Not doing door locks because the building won't even allow you to change what the look of your door is on your apartment. So a lot of times you can't even put in a secondary door lock. Many of these apartments are not central air. They're windowed. They're through wall air conditioning or PTAC units. So there's no HVAC work. So it tends to be mostly AV, networking, and some smart home in terms of lighting. Smart home really comes down to lighting and shading and the occasional thermostat. That tends to be the smart home. And you're talking fewer square footage, fewer rooms, so fewer lighting loads. I might do, my apartment, for example, is a little under 1,200 square feet. I think I've got 13 or 14 lighting loads. It's not a huge smart lighting job. And I think that's where the scope and scale changes for me, is that I'm doing mostly, call it 1 to 3 4-bedroom apartments, as opposed to doing a 5,000 square foot townhouse.
And how's the evolution worked for you in terms of your product mix? Todd mentions in his articles, and we've talked about it, that he really respects that you're not afraid to put something on your workbench and try it out. Obviously you want to make sure it's bulletproof before you start selling it, installing it, but he might get kind of set in his ways and doing something a certain way, but he reaches out to you and says, for instance, early days of Snap AV, he wasn't really accepting of that, and you were. And so what's the evolution look like for you in terms of product mix?
A lot of it is, I either see it, sometimes it's something I see at CEDIA. I'm like, ooh, that looks interesting and fun. Let me buy 1 or 2 of those and play with it. I usually plug it in at home. My apartment is my test bench, much to my family's consternation sometimes.
Right.
They're not happy they were not happy that I was testing out different control systems, and I changed the remote controls on them every couple of years. But that's really what it is. I see something, whether I see it in the marketing, I see an article in the trade press, and it just catches my attention. Or it's just something that I've early on, it was something maybe I used myself. I used Sonos. I had a Sonos Play 1 when I was starting the industry. And a lot of it comes from also, I was when I first started out, I was more willing to try new things because I wasn't set in my ways and didn't know things. I'm getting a little more set in my ways now. The longer I've been in the industry, I'm kind of married to Control 4, and I do a lot of Sonos as well. Snap AV, I got into really because, at ADI, we were a little afraid of them. They were the new upstart. They had the great website, and everybody was excited about Snap AV. And so when I left ADI, I was like, okay, these guys kind of really get this industry, and they're focused on the AV category, and they have a nice streamlined product set. And that's kind of what I look for, is a streamlined product set, product assortment. It's really hard when the product assortment is so broad, I don't even know what to choose or what to pick. So a lot of it is who's going to support me in terms of technical support. I will only work with products that have real technical support that I can call into. And while a company like Sonos, it is the consumer tech support line you get, they're still quite good. But if it's a company, there are some companies out there that'll go nameless that don't offer any call-in tech support. I know others in the industry will use them, but I can't be left hanging like that on a client project and run into an issue and have no one to help me.
Before we continue our conversation, Mark, I just need to take a short break to get a word from our sponsor.
Thank you for listening to Residential Tech Talks. Today's broadcast is brought to you by ELK Products, a leading designer and manufacturer of customized security, automation, and energy management solutions for home and business with unsurpassed product quality and technical support. Secure, reliable, innovative. Control at your fingertips. Find out more today. Go to elkproducts.com.
Welcome back. I'm talking to Mark Feinberg. I'm Jeremy Glowacki from Residential Tech Today. And Mark, I wanted to discuss the topic that we have to discuss on every podcast, which is the COVID-19 pandemic, and particularly because of your location in New York City. I know it really was, it really hamstrung you during the early days.
Absolutely.
Because New York really shut down. I talked to Todd about that as well, and he comes in from New Jersey, but you're right there in the city. Did everything just completely stop work-wise for you for a while?
Yeah, pretty much. While we were still essential workers, our challenge was that, or at least for my business, most of our work is in high-rise condo buildings which have doormen, and they just would not let you in. There was absolutely no way. They shut down all work. I mean, I had clients who were mid-gut renovation and work just stopped, and they sat on it for 3 months, that they were, living in a temporary housing. Or I had one client who was a week away from moving in.
Oh, wow.
And couldn't move in. So, everything completely shut down. I had a couple of smaller projects that kept me going a little bit in some non-doorman buildings, and one small more of a retrofit in a townhouse. Okay. So those kept me afloat, along with the PPP money for the 3 months that New York was completely shut down. We opened phase 1 of New York reopening, which I think was in early June. Buildings started letting us back in. They still have a lot of restrictions. They still say only for any job site, only two people are allowed to work on that job site at a time. So you can imagine that if you've got, a sheetrocker, a painter, electrician, a plumber, pick 2 bodies you can put in at any given day.
Right.
It makes it a little tough to get the work done. But still, things are picking up. Proposals are, requests for proposals are coming in left and right, and the volume is definitely picking up now, which is a really great sign. People realized how bad their network and their AV was. I mean, you're hearing that nationally. And one thing I know nationally, a lot of people never slowed down where it was less acute. It was so acute in New York, people were afraid to have anyone into their home.
Right.
And some still are. There are still, especially people who are at high risk, are not going to come back into this market until there's a vaccine.
How besides following those protocols that are forced on you with the 2-person operation, how have your protocols changed as a company going into a residence now?
The toughest thing is probably encouraging the client to maintain distance. They kind of forget, because they're in their house, so they forget to put on a mask, or they don't want to put on a mask because they're in their own home, and they still want to be in the room and watch what we're doing sometimes, especially in some of the smaller things. So it's asking them to, please, respect our safety and maintain distance. And we send that communication out to them and have that discussion beforehand, but it still sometimes happens. So that's probably the biggest challenge. Wearing a mask, wearing gloves, not the end of the world. It's, you buy some more comfortable masks. Gloves can sometimes be a challenge when you're working with finer things. They get caught up in, in like coax screws and things like that, or so it can be a little tough with the gloves sometimes. But if the client is home, if there's no client on site, if it's more of a construction site, it's just masks.
Right.
So and we have we keep hand sanitizer with us, and we wash our hands as soon as we walk into a client's home. If it's a residence they're living in, it's just a little bit slower getting things done now, but it's not that bad.
And are you starting to get any new requests, or are you exploring other technologies because of the experience you've gone through with this? I know networking, obviously, and working with video conferencing. Are you looking at any video conferencing platforms that are different, or anything new technology-wise?
Yeah, I've looked at it a little bit. I mean, there are some platforms out there that are kind of an all-in-one almost sound bar that has the camera, and you could put a little Nuke computer in there and and do a full video conferencing with more of a soundbar into the TV. It feels like most of my clients, that's really what I think people at home want to use for those family Zoom calls.
Yeah.
And then they kind of see the price of it, and at least in my experience, say, no, maybe not worth it for the family Zoom calls.
Yeah.
Because for work, in all honesty, for work, people need a webcam, a good webcam, better lighting, maybe dual monitors. And frankly, we don't really want to get into their computers.
Yeah.
We're happy to do the networking, but once we start connecting webcams and putting in wireless keyboards and setting up dual monitors, well, now we've become their IT department. And whenever something goes wrong with that computer, I'm afraid we're going to get the phone call if they get a virus or if something else happens on the computer. And that's just not our skill set. So we're shying away from a lot of that. I mean, I looked into it and I really was pretty gung-ho about it until I kind of delved deeper and realized it's going to make me their true IT person, not just their network expert. And I wasn't ready for that.
And another idea that I think came up, that a lot of folks who've been reluctant in this industry to do remote service and have these systems for recurring revenue even, said, oh, this is really the time to start selling this, because we could be in there helping someone out if they're not comfortable being in their home. Do you do a lot of remote service with existing, previous jobs?
Right.
Or is this something that you're going to expand because of COVID?
Yeah, we definitely do a lot of remote systems. We put an oversee platform into almost every job, whether it's the hub or built into the routers. We put IP power conditioners, watt boxes, the network gear. We can all, it all kind of ties into oversee. So we've been providing that for a long time. Early on, it was really, free service.
Yeah.
I was struggling with how to structure service plans. And then I knew my big missing piece was offering 24/7 support. And as a small shop with just myself and 2 installers/techs, really could not reliably offer 24/7 support. One Vision was priced out of our range for a small shop like us and for the size jobs we do. And then I got really excited when Parasol came around. I was very early on board with Parasol, really once they opened up out of their internal beta and open to the general integrator population. And we've been with Parasol now, I think it's now 2 years, I guess, since they went live. Okay. And that was the game changer that allowed me to launch support plans, get recurring revenue. And that I was using it a lot during the lockdown, helping clients who had it. And I'm now not shy to charge people who don't sign up for a support plan for that remote support because they had the option to pay. So it's really helped our remote support revenue, both in recurring monthly revenue and in one-off charges. It's been and it's a game changer. Clients really value it now too. They don't want someone coming in their house, so it's become an easier sell too.
That's great to hear. I know those offerings, and I don't get a chance to talk to a lot of companies who are actually using them. So it's great to hear a success story there. And I think that's perfect timing to start adding that to your mix if you're not already.
Yeah.
What about working with manufacturers during this whole stretch of time? I'm imagining that you're probably not doing at your stage in your career as much training as maybe junior techs coming up, maybe learning some new things, might have to be doing some virtual training. Are you having manufacturer communication, things that are different than they were before because everyone's virtual?
Yeah, I mean, it was actually great. I mean, all the trainings that were offered, and you know, a lot of the manufacturer trainings were really product information. So it was a great opportunity to learn about either product lines we're not using, brands we're not using now, and learn more about them, or even product lines within manufacturers we're currently working with, but we're not using that particular product line, to really learn a lot more about what's out there and what our opportunities are. I use that. I did some of the CEDIA trainings that, you know, they had opened up their entire training catalog, and I worked through some of those. Early on, I was doing everything. I really, probably for about a month, tried to treat it as if I was still in an office every day, all day, for, you know, 4 to 6 hours at least. So I was doing a lot of trainings, updating my website, you know, working on marketing and brochures, and doing whatever I could to kind of keep that momentum going. Kind of petered out after probably 6 weeks or so. I got a little zoomed out at that point.
Yeah.
But the trainings I thought were fantastic, that what everyone was doing to keep the industry educated and occupied. And informed, I thought was fantastic. Snap did a lot of great ones. Control 4 had a weekly kind of tech. One of their top trainers did every Friday did a topic for about an hour on different key things and little tips and tricks throughout the programming software. That was huge. I watched those every Friday. You know, Sonos did things. I watched things from Origin Acoustics and many other companies. They all had great information out there, and it really, you know, as you said, like earlier, as we talked about how do I learn about products to bring in and bench test. That was a good way to bring some things in and bench test I played with.
Nice. Well, that's a hidden little side benefit of terrible time, I guess.
Exactly.
So, you know, we always try to look at tech trends ahead, and we've talked about some of the COVID related ones that have cropped up. But what about some of the other things like, you know, healthy home in general? Are you exploring anything about that yet, in terms of either the lighting aspects or ventilation, or anything that you could do with clients there in New York? I know it's limited with the big buildings, but what are you looking at in terms of trends ahead?
I mean, I think some of the Ketra lighting and the circadian rhythm lighting, I think, could be an opportunity. I think in the price point and market I'm in, at this point, it hasn't come down to the price point where I think it works in my client base. You know, we sometimes struggle just to sell traditional smart lighting, automated lighting. So that, I think, is an opportunity down the line. Some of the, you know, air filtering and air purification is a lot tougher, because you're talking about, you know, room air conditioners and radiators. You're not really, or electric baseboard heating. You don't have, you know, I haven't delved into what the product really is. My guess is it really ties into a centralized HVAC system,
right,
and filtration system. So probably wouldn't work for a lot of the systems and the clients I'm working with. And frankly, I think I'm leaving that more to the HVAC professionals, just because the air handling is their expertise. You know, we're still focusing on really the traditional, you know, better networking. I think one thing we're seeing is still this trend towards more, a lot of the consumer grade product. You know, in a lot of the retrofit situations we have, you know, we love Ruckus and Access Networks for our networking, for our Wi-Fi solutions, but, you know, people want better system, but they aren't sometimes in a retrofit situation. When that's all they're doing, they see that price ticket and they kind of have a little heart attack. Yeah. So, you know, some of the more consumer grade mesh networks, if we're not putting in a control system, if we're just upgrading the Wi-Fi and they're not doing control systems, they're really just want a better network in their homes. Aero has been a phenomenal success story for us for that, especially where we can't run wires. We don't have attics or basements to run wires through. The only way to get a wire from point A to point B is cutting a hole every 14 inches through to get through the studs, mesh is really the only solution for us. And that's been quite successful for us. Looking down the pike, I'm seeing more of those kind of consumer grade things. You know, the Ring doorbell is something people love, and I'm hoping what happens is some of that technology trickles up to our industry into the more professional grade products, so we can continue to sell things that integrate better, are more reliable, provide better remote support capabilities, but have the feature sets and are at a more compelling price point to compete with what the consumer grade brands are coming out with. I think that's where our opportunity is really being able to take some of that technology that's out there at the consumer grade brands and integrate it or adapt it to the professional grade product so that we can integrate it better.
Yeah, that definitely is something I could see, and that budget that you're talking about, and to be the consultant, the advisor that they can trust, that comes in and says, yes, this is something you've heard of, and it would work in your home, but this one maybe not so much yet. We're not seeing support from that. So that's a great service you can provide as well. Mark, thank you so much for taking the time today. It's been a pleasure talking to you.
Thanks for having me, Jerry. I really enjoyed the talk. This is great.
And also thanks for everybody for joining us, and be sure to comment, share, or subscribe to the podcast. You can check out all the latest residential tech news at restechtoday.com. Until next time, please stay safe, stay inspired, and let us know if you have a great story to tell.
Residential Tech Talk, lighting specialist, Residential Tech Talk,
Home automation, smart device, home or smart house.